Hello.
Hello, Easter.
Hey, Time. How have you been?
Doing very well. Been working on this quite a bit.
Nice.
We are.
Can you already tell us a little bit, or are we waiting for the others about what
Yes,
the
I will
topics
have
are going to
a
be?
preamble for us before we get started. Mr.
Okay.
Pucci will be late due to work, and we are just waiting on an arbiter to join us, I believe. He's not here in about 1 minute. We'll go ahead with that.
Sounds good. Have you been playing some Mechabellum as of late?
Yes, indeed. I played towards the end of last season, and also played this season several games.
Nice.
Can you share your secret account?
No, I cannot. It is indeed a secret, though. I beat Zolag and Jeremiah a couple days ago, so it's decent MMR, that's for sure.
Nice.
No one will ever guess it. It is using very secret characters. Alright, well, I will assume that Arbiter will join us in a couple minutes. I sent him a reminder, and again, Apucci will be a little bit late. But hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mechabellum Balanced Townhall, hosted by MAG1. I'm, of course, your host, Time for Miracle. I'm joined this evening by Rooster PB, or morning, depending on where you are. For Surrey, it's very, very early in the morning. Thank you for joining us, Surrey. We'll also be joined in a few by Forgotten Arbiter, which I'm assuming that is probably him right there. And we'll also be joined a bit later by Apucci. So, before we begin this discussion, I just want to give a short preamble about what we're here for. In my experience, how we frame discussions is super important for productivity. So I just like to start this one by reminding everyone listening, as well as my colleagues here, that while we're ostensibly just here to discuss balance, that how things feel to play against or as, and how fun they feel or how unfun they feel, is just as, if not more important than raw data for making a fun and relatively balanced game. So, just for everybody, I'd like to offer that for consideration, and ask that we think about both the fun and the balance of things as we go through things. Also, just as a reminder for chats, I will be noting down some questions that y'all asked throughout the broadcast, and towards the very end, we'll talk about those for a few minutes. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it from me. For my colleagues here, if you would like to introduce yourselves, we can start with Rooster. If you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself for anybody listening that may not know you, anything like sure, be fine.
Sure. I mean, for those of you that don't know, my name is Rooster. I've been playing the game since September of 2023, and I've streamed it basically ever since I started pretty consistently. I also make content on YouTube, and I cast every now and then for MAG1, and that's about it, I'd say.
Most excellent. Thank you, Rooster. Sorry, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody listening?
Yes, hello, I am the Rat. I've been streaming and playing this game at high level for the past 1.5 years, I think. I also make YouTube videos. And my least favorite unit in the game is the Arclight, which is not great for this current patch.
Suri says that after having made a music video about the glory of the arc lights. Suri makes really awesome Mechabellum meme videos, by the way. Definitely check them out. I think it's hilarious that that's your least favorite units.
Yeah. I think it's my least favorite unit because it seems to be everyone else's favorite unit.
Well, there's certainly a lot of arc lights running around nowadays. And Arbiter, are you with us? Could you mic check for us real quick?
Hello.
Hello, hello. Could you introduce yourself for everybody listening, sir?
Hi, I'm Forgotten Arbiter. I've been playing this game for a very long time, since like before beta, since like the test server days. Mostly at a very high level. Recently I've been a bit busy, haven't been able to play quite as much, and sometimes I stream with no schedule. Last time I streamed was like an attorney with Sacco.
Very good. Thank you very much. All right, and like I said, Apucci will be joining us a bit later. For my introduction, hello, I'm Time. Many of you may know me already. I've played and streamed this game at a high level for a very long time, streamed the game for more than 1,000 hours, played for about, well, I guess I've streamed and played for almost the same length of time, about 2,000-ish at a pretty high level. And yeah, currently I am working with MAG1 on various events, hosting this as well. So, to get us started, fellas, we can go in any particular order. As far as discussion, feel free to throw in whatever you'd like. I feel like it would be very remiss if the first thing we did not discuss in this balanced town hall would be oil and fire. Just as a quick thing before we start with that, though, we will try and like hit a variety of topics. So if we're lingering on one thing too long, then I may hurry us along. But other than that, feel free to give as much or as little detail about things as you would like during the discussion. But let's start with oil and fire, just as mechanics, not necessarily like oil on tower. But I'm curious if anyone has any ideas or thoughts they would like to share about how that affects the game currently and what your perception of is as a player.
I don't mind going first. I don't have a particular problem with oil and fire existing. It's just the amount of it, I think, that is annoying to play against. So, of course, like we're not necessarily talking about oil in the tower, but there are a lot of games where like double oil will show up and incendiary. And then at that point, especially with how long oil as a spell sticks around, it just completely takes over the game. And it's going to be there for the majority of a particular game. So I feel like that is one of the main issues with it. As regards like fire, it's not the most fun thing to play against, but I think if you just like if we can somehow like tone down the amount of spells that can be ignited, so like the amount of oils, incendiaries, etc., it's fine in small amounts. I think currently there are some situations where it's absolutely mandatory. I just came off a game where I was playing against a Typhoon push with late crawlers. I think that stuff is almost unplayable to defend if you don't get some late fire on the board. Like the crawlers just get everywhere. So the mechanic in itself, I think currently is still required unless somehow like chaff becomes much weaker. But I would just like to see it, I guess, being toned down in how often it shows up and how often you do simply need to play it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. Sounds like the key points for you is that you feel it's very much mandatory in many situations, and also the frequency is a big pain point. It's the biggest things.
Yes.
That's what I heard. So, anyone have any counterpoint to that, or how do you feel? Do we agree with Rooster, or do we feel differently, Surrey and Arbiter?
Well,
I'll
I think
go.
the
Oh, you go
oh
then.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go. So I think fire in general is the spells are too wide. The amount of fire is too big. Like the problem here is that most of the time the fire is a lot better for the other player. Like the other guy has a slower army than the other guy. So whoever needs to engage first is very vulnerable to fire. And it like completely negates one unit type from the other player. So it's like a huge swing when a fire comes around. And the area is so big that it basically kills everything. And I think oil has very similar problems because the area is so big, and now with the free unit drops and some new units like the fire batcher and stuff like that, it's very cost efficient to ignite your oil on the second turn, because most of the time you get the free unit to ignite it. And I think the oil in general, it's pretty interesting spell because it offers a lot of different use cases. Like you can use it in so many different ways. So I kinda like it as a spell, but it's just way too strong. So that's my opinion about fire and oil. And maybe the main point is that I don't like spells that are always better for the other player. That's one thing I don't like.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like especially the asymmetrical aspect is what you find frustrating, and basically many attributes of the spells themselves you find to be very powerful during the game. Frequency, intensity, duration, length, all those things.
Yeah, and think that they are much better for the other player than the other. So they have the same card choices, but it's just better for the other guy. Sometimes
Yeah.
that's you, sometimes not.
For sure. Can be very asymmetrical. And Arbiter, what were your thoughts on oil and fire?
I think oil and fire. First of all, the cooldown is too short. They're some of the most um, powerful spells in the game, and it feels like um, by the time you're finished playing around them, especially if they get more than one copy, you have like this tiny, tiny window to play without like an oil or fire spell on the ground. Um, and so I really feel like you should have a wider window of no oil/fire spells when they show up. And like other people have said, um, they, in some situations, tend to favor one player very heavily, and generally that's they favor the defender if somebody is playing aggro. And so aggro games are very swingy depending on whether oil/fire spell up, oil/fire show up. Um, and that can feel like it adds an unnecessary amount of randomness to the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more from my own personal perspective, and sounds like you agree with many points made by Suri and Rooster as well on a lot of that.
Yeah.
Most excellent. So, obviously, a hot topic related to this is oil on tower, and has been for a long time. So, I would now like to ask, now that we have the general idea of how we feel about these spells and their, prevalence, how strong they are, on all those things. How do we feel about oil on tower at the moment? And also, could someone clarify for me? Is it currently stated by Bear like they intend to add a research time? By the way, for anyone listening that does not know, and for myself as well, because I don't think I have concrete information on that. Is that something that's been commented on by him? Or is that just a suggestion that has been made to add a research time, but not like confirmed to be happening?
I've heard him talk about it on stream a while back, but I don't think we have like any concrete date or like confirmation that this is when that's going to happen. But there has been a stream of his where he was talking about the option of adding more spells to tower with cooldowns on them, so that you would buy a spell and then you'd know your opponent in 2 turns time would get a certain spell, but no confirmation as of yet that that's actually going to happen.
I see. I got it. Yeah, I think the reason I was thinking it may have been confirmed is I've heard him talking about it. He streams on the Play Mechabellum channel for anyone who does not know on Twitch. And he often fields questions and answers from chat about things like this. So I think I heard him talking about this thing, and he sounded very confident about it. So I think I got the impression that perhaps that was happening. Maybe we'll see that soon. But whether or not that will happen or not, I would like to ask you all how you feel about the current implementation. How does that feel to play against, and what are your general thoughts on it? It's obviously a very talk to death topic in the community, but I feel it's important to do so in the Balanced Townhall as well.
I actually think it's all right for oil to be on tower. Like, in general, it's just oil is so powerful, the cooldown's so short, you can get another one, and that just makes it much more problematic than it needs to be.
Makes sense. So once again, the frequency and availability of oil is a big pain point, sounds like.
Yeah.
I think I somewhat disagree, but I just have like something against spells on, or like offensive spells on the tower anyway. I don't like the whole idea of there's nothing I can do to prevent this from showing up, which I guess a solution like a cooldown would somewhat mitigate, aside from how powerful a spell may be. Currently, I think it's really frustrating to play against, is this turn the turn that the oil shows up, or maybe next turn, or the turn after? Is there anything I can do about it? Like, I wouldn't want, any other offensive spell to be on the tower at any point. The nice thing about the whole card system is that you know what your opponent is offered, and you can try and play around that. But with any spells being on the tower, and currently that's only oil, if they have no cooldown, like, I don't know. For me, it just kind of loses like the strategic aspect almost in certain games because you know it's coming, but sometimes you don't know where. Like, is it left side, right side? Like, this turn, next turn. It's just so like I don't know, frustrating to play around. Not always, but sometimes it is.
I guess my point there would be actually, I think how frustrating it is largely a function of how many units there are in the meta that spread fire or are Vulcans. Um, if like everybody is playing Vulcans every single game, then that's always a factor. If everybody is playing Firestorms every game, then that's also always a factor. And if those units are not very meta, then oil is more interesting. And I think the research time would help with that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Sounds like you definitely can both agree that uh, the impact of the fire, as well as the oil itself, but primarily the fire and like how that interacts the units in the game, is a big reason why we find it frustrating and difficult to play around, or even impossible to play around in certain circumstances, depending on what's happening in the game. I do want to add, by the way, I asked Sako to be here with us today, but he could not attend for scheduling reasons. But one thing he mentioned, because I asked him, like, what things would you like to share with us during this? Without any prompting, of course, I didn't ask him, like, how do you feel about oil? But one thing Sako said was he thinks, I quote, spells are too strong compared to other cards. Maybe they should receive nerfs similar to items of Nikon cards. And obviously, if you've ever watched Sako's stream, you know for sure he was thinking about oil and fire when he said that, in addition to other spells. But I'm curious what you all think about that general idea of, do you think all spells are too strong compared to other cards? And do you agree with Sako's take that they should receive nerfs similar to other things?
Yes, for sure.
Big yes.
Maybe not all spells, but at least like 2/3 of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah, I think big problem with the spells is the cooldown. Like, for example, the oil on the tower. Like, there's a situation where you can buy it pretty cheaply early on against the push, and then you will get it back up again. And same with like maybe the biggest offender is like round 2 underground threat,
Oh my
right?
days! Don't get me
Like
started.
like you don't actually
Yep.
pick it for the round 2, or it's pretty good. You get like a saber level out of it because you win the round. But the real power comes when it's back up, right? Orbital bombardment sometimes the same. I think the cooldown is a big problem, and I think on the spells I don't like the design that it deletes one unit type from the enemy. Like, for example, Storm, which is it's not imbalanced or anything. It's just a pretty good spell, but how it affects the game is that you cannot build like late game wasp compositions or stuff like that, or it limits the ability to build different comps, different spells, because they are so powerful against certain comps.
I think this is especially true in standard. Um, in standard, it feels like you just have to take every spell a lot of the time because they're gonna come back, and then if you don't have it, then you're kind of in trouble. And they even do HP damage or like often get equivalent exchange and like shield value the first turn anyway. Like they're not even it's not even bad economy to take them a lot of the time because they're just that powerful.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I think there are some spells that are just like inherently, well, just too strong. I guess you could say for their cost, or maybe just too strong. Period. Like Underground and Wasp Drop, both can show up on turn 2, and both are extremely inefficient to properly counter. Neither of them is really consistently missileable. Underground certainly isn't. Um, and then you've got spells like Ion Beam and Javelin, I think, that both are either too cheap or have too low of a cooldown, because they have 3-round cooldown compared to all of the other bigger spells that have 4 rounds of cooldown. And like they're almost always worth picking up. Like some of these spells, if they show up on round 4, it's almost always worth to pick it up because of the short cooldown, and then I'll just get it back a second time during the game. And with how much they impact a given round, it's just like 2 rounds during the game that will be mostly decided on the spells.
Mhm. I'd say the only problem I have with the wasp drop is you can't missile it. I feel like it'd be pretty easy to make the wasp spawn like in a tight cluster so you can actually consistently missile it.
Yeah,
Um,
that would fix it. Also, the fact that it loses or it wins against fangs is, I mean, that's didn't used to be the case, but like I guess it's both. Like the fact that it can't be missiled and it also wins against fangs means that it doesn't leave a lot of good options.
The variance
and
on
yeah,
that
I
one
mean the
especially is a
crawler
big
drop
pain
is
point.
just way too good. I think that should cost more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. But I will say
100%.
this that many players are also pretty bad against defending these spells. They haven't figured out what the optimal strategy is. Like you can actually defend 2 spots of like crawler summoning or rhino drop with 1 crawler deployment and a mobile beacon and stuff like that. So there's definitely more to learn about defending them.
I mean, there is, but I kind of worry about the casual player base here. Because I'm not sure like this
Sure,
impacts
sure.
high MMR all that much, but if you just start out the game and it's like you have no idea what's going on or like how to perfectly counter these, which is still relatively hard, um, like I don't think it's an extremely fun experience.
Yeah, so it sounds like overall that's kind of just this whole conversation here for the spells thing is we don't seem to find it to be a fun experience overall because they feel too good to not pick, and many are frustrating to defend against in certain ways or happen to asymmetrically affect certain boards in certain ways as well. So it sounds like
Yeah,
overall
it's
then that you all pretty much agree with Sako's take. Obviously not all spells are too strong or not all should receive nerfs, but the majority seem to fall into this camp of things we find frustrating and too good for what they cost.
it also somewhat falls in line with the big changes that we had to items because they had a big round where they removed some items and a bunch of them got either more expensive or got toned down in their effect. And spells basically got ignored when that happened. So it feels like for spells to fall in line with kind of the same reason that we nerfed some of the items, it would make a lot of sense to tone them down a bit.
Also,
Yeah,
fortress
that's
bubbles
true.
got nerfed extremely hard.
And all other bubbles also.
Except hacker.
Yeah, except hacker, true.
Hacker got
But
nerfed
yeah,
many moons ago when hacker spam was too good and they nerfed storms. Got nerfed by 20% way back then, remember? Ever since then, it's not been
Yeah.
touched though.
Okay, hacker hasn't been nerfed in a long time.
Yeah, like a
We'll say.
year.
and one thing about the spells is that I think some spells like orbital javelin and missile strike are like much more strategical for me than, for example, orbital bombardment. Like I like spells that are harder to use and easier to play around. Like you can mobile beacon your guys out of a orbital javelin or missile strike, and as the aggressor you can get rid of some critical unit defending like a flank or a side position and beacon around it to kill the enemy tower or stuff like that. So it requires strategical thinking from both sides. But something like orbital bombardment, you just pick it and put it like wherever and it does its job. So I like these spells that require some thinking when you use them. So I think that would be a very good talking point about the spells or about how to design them in the future.
Yeah, I kind of agree, but at the same time, this is also like those spells also suffer of like the same thing where it's often better for one player because a lot of defensive boards, not all of them, but some of them are like extremely static. And a lot of players like to just like stack and bunch up a bunch of units, and that might not be ideal, but across a lot of MMR levels it does work. But then, if you have a bunch of slow units bunched up, like you can't realistically beacon out of javelin or beacon out of like an ion beam. So it also depends a lot on like what comp you're playing. If you have a lot of like slow units, big units, like you can't dodge those spells either.
Yeah, that is true as well. Good points.
Yeah, really great points for sure. I really like, Suri, that you brought up how some spells do actually feel fun to play against and creates interesting gameplay that you find engaging rather than the, we'll say, less interactively designed spells like Bombard. That's you kind of just click and there's nothing to really think about, especially if like your comp dies to it. For example, like perhaps you're playing Wasp and your comp evaporates if it gets hit by Bombard, then you kind of explode, as opposed to thinking about, oh, do I think that Arbiter is going to send his unit this way and I javelin it this way, or perhaps we think he will greed and send it straight forward, or maybe he sends it backwards. Like this interplay between things is something that we seem to agree has at least some merit as compared to things which you just slam on the board and it's just good.
Yeah, some of the spells actually like could read that delete one unit type from the enemy. They are just that powerful. Like the fire deletes all the enemy crawlers. And
The fire in
storm
standard is even worse. It's so
yeah,
annoying. Like, imagine playing Mustangs in standard.
true. But it's not a good experience when the game is like very strategical of what kind of units you include in your composition, and then the enemy or you just get a free card that says like you don't have an answer to this specific unit, and now you have this spell. Just put it here, and you don't have this problem anymore. Like
Yeah, it sounds like
remember Arbiter when we played some 2 versus 2, and you said that I lacked chaff clear, and then I said that nuke is my chaff clear, and then the nuke killed everything, all the fangs the enemy had. So that's the spell.
so. I'd say the biggest takeaway from this discussion on spells seems to be that across the board, many are too effective for their cost, and that a big pain point is that some spells, not all, have a lack of interactivity. In some formats, maybe not all, perhaps aggro is the most affected in some ways, but the degree to which it affects boards asymmetrically is not something that we seem to find fun or perhaps as balanced as it could be. And I'm
I
sure
think
we could sit here
something
and
I
talk
haven't
about. Oh,
heard
sorry, go ahead,
mentioned
Arbiter.
yet about that is that it's it's not like like there's always going to be one side like favored more than the other for some cards, and spells are included there. But it does exacerbate the problem when you just get the same thing twice in a row. So it's like your board gets destroyed by Ion Beam, and then there's an Ion Beam, and then there's another Ion Beam the next turn. It's like, well, that sucks.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to address that point, and then let's move on to the next topic. But how do y'all feel about the fact that both for oil and fire, obviously those can only receive one dupe in the current version of the game. But how do you feel about the fact that, as Arbiter just mentioned, you can have like ion into ion into ion? Do you think that's fun?
Nope, get rid of it. Not enjoyable at all. I have no big issue with spells. I think it's kind of an interesting thing to have in the game. If toned down, it shouldn't be an insta pick, but it's fine to have like a variety of spells. But I don't like the double spell stuff. Like even if you tone them down and it like sometimes will disproportionately affect one player, as long as it's like one round and it doesn't happen every single game, it's kind of fine. Like RNG does keep the game fresh, but yeah, like those games where like it's just spell into spell into spell into spell is really unfun to play against.
Yeah, the damage you take from the spell rounds is like too high. Like it's fine if you lose 1000 health for one spell, but when there's 2 in a row and you lose 2000 health per spell, then you're just dead, cannot do anything. That's a common experience, I think, in many high level games.
Yeah, 100%. It's always really sad when I'm either spectating or casting a game and I see somebody get like ion into lightning storm or something and they just explode. Really sad experience as a watcher, I think, and definitely so as a player as well. So thank you very much for your thoughts on the spell topic. I'm sure we could have the entire Balanced Townhall on just spells if we wanted to. I would like to get some other topics though. Also, as a reminder for chats, if you have any questions you would like to ask us towards the end of the broadcast, we'll spend the last like 5 or 10 minutes addressing questions. So feel free to fill those in chat if you'd like to, and I will get any of those down that we can, and we'll try and address those. For the next topic, this may be a brief one, but I would like to ask you all just what's your general thoughts on Saber-tooth as a starting unit? How do you feel it's affected the meta? It's certainly my understanding and experience that it is extremely presence, very, very high presence, very high effectiveness. So I'm curious how you feel its transition to the starting pool has been and how it's affected things.
It's too
Well,
strong.
I can. Okay, you
Go ahead,
start.
sorry.
Sure.
No, you go.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, it's way too strong. It's the best unit in the game for the starters, for sure. Along with Arclight, right? But and also I think one big problem with the starting packs and Saber-tooth is that all of the starting packs feel kind of same. They have similar movement speed. All are kind of slow, and I think most of the games I played this season were just very similar because of the starting packs. And the the Tarantula has been completely destroyed by the Saber-tooth, so that's not good as well. But I guess they can just nerf the Saber-tooth a little bit and it will be fine. But still the problem remains that all the starting packs feel very similar to each other. I would like to have a little bit more variety.
Suri, can I ask you if every time you look at the starting packs, you still hate them all? Or do you actually like Sabres when you see them?
I like Sabers. I always pick the Sabers. Everything else I hate.
Suri famously looks at starting packs and says, I hate all of these every time. This is the root of this question. Rooster and Arbiter, what do you think about Sabres?
Go ahead.
I mean, yeah, too strong. I think it's too tanky in the first place. Realistically, early game, it's kind of hard to get the DPS units on the board. Like it's round 1, it's marksman, and that's pretty much it. And then Phoenix maybe round 2 if you're gonna postpone. But the unit is so tanky, and because it has such good matchups, it also tends to level up early, and then you're in real trouble because now you're sitting there like I don't know how to kill 30,000 hit points worth of units. Like this is really hard. And then on top of things, it just kind of limits board variety as well. Obviously, we've talked a bit about Arclight, but if we look at chaff clear options, you know, Spider maybe at some point could be a contender, but the problem is it gets so heavily countered by Saber and also doesn't have great matchup into Stormcaller. Um, it's just not pickable. So it just limits board variety so much that yeah, I can totally get behind the feeling that boards feel very much the same.
Yeah, 100%. I would like to offer the perspective that tarantulas are playable in the scenario when you're offered all 3 starting Saber packs, then your opponent cannot start with Sabers. Thumbs up.
Yes, true.
Are they though?
Still
I
don't
don't
think
know.
it's good at high MMR, but yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not. I definitely agree with you. Oh, for sure. It feels like every game I played this patch at around 2K-ish, every game it feels the exact same. Every board is all Sabers, all Arcs. It is quite not good as an experience, if I had to say the very least. What do you think about that, Arbiter?
Yeah, I think sabers are too good and arcs are too good and they're best friends. One thing that other people haven't mentioned, I think like saber needs one less splash radius at least. Like some of the splashes it gets are just disgusting. Um, and it feels like a unit that just shouldn't be able to do that. Like kill 2 balls at once, kill 2 sledges at once, like hit a crawler and kill an arc that didn't seem to be in the same spot. I don't know. Um, but I don't know, that's kind of a minor little gripe. I think in general the game's been moving away from starting units that cost 200 and like scale into relevance in the mid game The trend has been like generally when you have starting units that snowball to a victory, that leads to problems. Because like the early game matchups matter too much. And so Saber like scales actually pretty well. Once it gets levels in the early game, it's like very hard to contest without just abandoning the ground. Um, and anything that can snowball like that combined with like strong early game is just a recipe for um like a bad time balance wise.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a big commonality between all the responses here is that Saber is both very tanky, snowballs very quickly, and is also very favorable matchups into many existing units, and also happens to have a very large splash radius relative to what you might expect, and happens to 2-for-1 balls and storms and sludges quite often. And also, welcome, Mr. Apucci. Thank you for joining us, sir. Apucci was late due to work, as I understand it. Hello, how you doing, sir?
Hello.
Apucci, would you like to introduce yourself very briefly for anyone listening who might not know you?
Yes, I am a Poochie. I play Mechabellum. I stream the tournaments on Saturdays a lot, and yeah, hello.
Thank you, Apucci. Apucci is very good at the video game, hence he is here with us today. Apucci, we were just talking about sabers as starting units, and also we have covered primarily oil and fire and how we feel about spells in general thus far.
Mm,
Very exciting stuff.
good topics, yeah.
Next thing, given that it sounds like you covered saber pretty heavily, is one thing we just mentioned quite a few times. We feel like arc lights are very prevalent. So, not too awful long ago, arc lights were almost never built in any large quantity. So I'm curious. I mean, it's been a few months, but not too long in Mechabellum terms. The game's been out quite a while at this point. But I'm curious, how do you all feel about how much arc lights has as far as like presence and standard and aggro, and how much investment it receives in the current version of the game, particularly techs like range and EMP seeing a very large amount of use. How do you feel about its presence and its balance currently?
Oh my god, it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
What
It
I've
is
seen
indeed.
from Arclight is that the only balancing lever that really matters, like outside of instances where they've taken the attack out of breakpoint ranges, is the attack speed. They buff the attack speed, Arclight's everywhere. They nerf the attack speed, Arclight's nowhere. So, uh, yeah, currently Arclight has the highest attack speed it's ever had, and Arclight sees the most play it's ever seen. So, it makes a lot of sense. I feel like to have any other relevant balancing levers, there would need to be a new tech. So that, for example, they could have a lower attack speed, but they have a tech that gives them more attack speed, and then like you have to invest to make Arclights good.
That's a good
Yeah.
suggestion. But I also think that there's a lot more to the Arclight balance right now, because what has happened in the latest patches is that the crawler gets nerfed. So inherently that means the Fang starts are better, and Fangs are very good with arcs. They go well together because the enemy has to invest in Mustangs to kill the Fangs, so then your Arclight becomes good. And one other thing is that they nerfed the jump drive wasps, and I'm an aggressive player, and I actually thought a little bit about my own plays, and I just always build wasps against arclights. Like the arclight core was very weak to wasps, because when you go jump drive wasp early, he needs to counter it with Mustangs or deploy Fangs in bad positions, and then you can transition maybe into sledges or something. So that was an effective way to counter the Arclight core. And now there's not that kind of option. And also the introduction of the Raiden made some of the other chaff clear units not very good, like Fire Badger. And yeah, there's a lot to it, I think, that happened in the last like 3 patches. And also the Saber-tooth, like the Arclight is, like Arbiter said, it's the Saber-tooth's best friend, so they go well together, and Fang is part of this trio as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I feel like every chaff clear unit that isn't Arclight has stronger available counters than Arclight. Like, for example, all of the mid-sized chaff clear units get owned by Scorpion. And like Wraith has its own host of problems protecting it. And like Vulcan is much later to get into and can also like has the issue of like you only have a few chaff clear units on the board, so if one of them gets locked up, you lose the entire round, whereas Arclight's one Arclight getting locked isn't the end of the world. But yeah, the Fang
think,
thing is a really good point.
I
yeah, I
think
think for
it's.
me, oh yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Okay,
No,
I'll
you go ahead.
No, you.
Okay. I think Arclight has been a dominant force in standard games for a very long time. Like ever since Vulcan like faded away, it's like Arclight was the chaff clear unit essentially. And it's been nerfed several times since then, and it's still basically the chaff clear unit in many cases. I mean, I guess Vulcan's pretty good now again. Um, but like Arclight, a big part of that is the range EMP combo actually makes it so that Arclight beats every ground unit that's not a giant, if the game goes long enough, at least in standard. Um, and yeah, I think lately, especially with Saber starts, Arclight used to be a pretty bad unit in headbutts. Now it's actually not bad. Just because like um things like Saber like allow you to just get to the point where the archites are all right and you can survive long enough that um your archites have time to do their thing. I don't know.
I think a big point for me as well is there's no other options. Like,
Yeah.
if I look at like the early rounds, what am I going to buy? Like Arclight is available, and it's the only chaff clear unit in the game that actually scales with levels because it has elite available. No other unit has that. Um, and there's no units apart from Vulcan basically that I would even consider playing between Arclight and that giant. I can't buy Fire Badgers, and even if I could, they're too low range, and they kind of are bad early on for the most part. So in standard, either way, like that's not playable. Um, Typhoons, kind of same thing, and also not available. Mustangs can get good, but also not really available in standard. And they need levels and text to become useful. And then, the one unit that maybe could contest it or like could become an additional option is Tarantula, but it has too many issues. Like it's too big of a unit, too expensive, needs too much resources, has no or needs like 2 techs before it becomes useful. It just there's no options. Um, so I don't like hate Arclight. I think it's fine for it to have a spot. I think it makes sense as well for players that logically have something to buy in the early game that clears chaff. Um, I would just like to see, well, if Arclight probably does need to get toned down because I think EMP is a bit too strong and maybe it does too much damage, but the other options need to become more viable. And I don't know what exactly needs to happen for that to be a thing, but I'd like it if I could buy other chaff clear units um, aside from Arclight and that they would kind of be able to contest during games.
Yeah, it's really tough in standard because range is so important, and
Yeah.
most possible chaff clear units just don't have enough range to play them in standard and a lot of boards. I think if Arclight were a little bit worse, you might see people actually doing a little bit more Sledgehammer, like Sledgehammer Phoenix stuff. But it could be that Scorpion deletes that too hard.
All right, well, thank you for your thoughts on Arclights, fellas. It sounds like we have a lot of concerns about Arclights, perhaps not the least of which is how it affects standard and maybe even like how Chaff would perform if Arclight were nerfed, other options that exist in the game, and why Arclight is where it is. Maybe the lack of text that's help be balance levers for Arclights rather than just its attack speed. In the interest of time, we have about 15 minutes left, and we'd like to leave at least a little bit of time left to answer some chat questions at the end. The last topic we have on the docket for this evening is EHP sources, effective HP sources. What we're thinking with this is armor, armor the tech, by the way, nano repair kits, portable shield, and things such as the level 2 armor war factory finisher was a topic proposed by Sako that falls in this category. And he even posed the question of, should War Factory have access to armor tech at all? I'd be curious about your general thoughts on what these EHP sources, how they interact with the rest of the game. Obviously, things like Rhino Spec with Nano have been a terror since the dawn of time, and people have complained endlessly about how like that sort of thing interacts with the game. And especially as like Worm has become a standard unit, we've seen lots and lots of these things very frequently. So, what are your general thoughts about how that interacts in the game currently? How do you feel about it?
I think it's a really good point. For example, in mini games, I could build an army that has total health of like maybe 100,000, maybe even less if it's like chaff, arc lights, maybe some storm callers, maybe a marksman or two, and that can be my army for most of the game. And the counter to that is going to be lots of chaff clear and like small high range damage, but like not big damage. But then at any point I can throw down a level 2 armor war factory which has 500,000 health, and you've never made an army that can deal 500,000 damage because why would you have? And then you lose the game because my entire army lives. So I think it's highly problematic that I think you mentioned the armor tech being a big point. I think fundamentally the unit's too health efficient and armor tech is too cost efficient. And it really doesn't matter what the unit does besides have all that health.
Being a gigantic brick is in fact quite powerful in the current version of the game.
Yeah, I think it's pretty crazy that you can actually, on a unit drop round, you can actually afford to purchase a level 2 factory with armor and photon. It's just so crazy.
It's kind of wild how it has like triple the hit points of a fortress, but it's basically just an 800 cost better fortress in terms of like what it does.
Yeah, I feel like War Factory in particular is given stats as if the maintenance cost or whatever it is, the upkeep, it is being valued at like a very sort of low interest rate. Like it's being costed as if you're gonna be around for 3 or 4 turns paying that interest, whereas really, realistically, you're trying to end the game with War Factory. So if you only have to pay that upkeep once or 0 times, it's just way too efficient, especially with health. I think they've nerfed the unit in every way they possibly can besides like the health efficiency, and it's just all that's left, and now we're just literally playing it, clicking every button that gives it more effective health, and just putting it in front of their army. So like I think we've reduced the problem down to the point that like yes, it has too much health, and that is simply the problem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's funny.
I've long been a proponent for not having this upkeep cost and balancing it around like being a normal unit. Because like the upkeep combined with incredibly efficient like stat line just makes it so you naturally have these plays where War Factory wins in one round and the upkeep doesn't even matter. And it's too easy to do that when armor costs 100 and does so much. I think armor being more expensive would go a long way, but long term, I don't want War Factory to be an upkeep unit. I think that was just a mistake.
One thing I feel that might be pertinent to present, because most players might not be thinking about this. I know you all probably have at least at some point, but as we bring up these points about how efficient War Factory is as a brick of HP, and as well as its like general damage stats as well, Arbiter maintains a like spreadsheet that he puts in a Discord that we're in, with the like squad HP cost per supply and DPS cost per supply. And I'd just like to bring up the fact that War Factory is about 50% more efficient than the next best thing per cost HP wise, which I think is Sandworm. And I believe the DPS is per gun. And it is, again, ahead of the pack even just the one gun, unless it's just two guns. I think it's
It's
one
two. You
though.
Two
put,
guns,
you put it for
two
two
guns.
guns. The assumption
Okay,
is
for two
two guns.
guns.
Yeah.
And honestly, there's a
two
lot of
guns.
situations where you get 3.
Yeah.
Indeed, for sure. Yeah, so as we have this discussion about efficiency, I feel like it's important to remember, like, we do actually have the numbers in this, and the numbers say it is extremely efficient compared to its field of opponents, I guess you could say, other units that you
Yeah.
play.
That efficiency is listed as if you never pay maintenance cost.
Indeed, yes.
But yeah, there's a variety of ways to think of it of the maintenance cost. It really just comes down to like how fast the game is going to end and sort of what you think the effective interest rate is, which is I think it's still too efficient at every realistic amount.
Another thing is you don't have to win the game instantly with it, because another advantage of War Factory is it's a gigantic body that you can sell all at once and move anywhere on the board. So, like, you put a melter where that War Factory there, where that blue War Factory is, like next turn that melter doesn't do anything.
Yeah,
And
the total sunk cost of the play is like 200 unlock, 100 on the elite recruit, 200 upkeep, and 100 on armor. So it's what, $600. So if your opponent unlocks and buys a melter that doesn't do anything, you already are kind of break even.
Also, perhaps
Even if you
important to
fully
think
sell
about.
out and don't play it again. Sorry.
No, you're good. Also, perhaps important to remember that all these things we're talking about with War Factory are only like with War Factory itself. It's like a completely different beast if it has like redeploy, for example, to be abused with. Like, do we sell it? Do we redeploy it? It's like we can do so many things with it that can end the game super easily. I feel like all these things contribute to the frustration surrounding it. Not even just like its stat line or like, its different interplay with like how fast the game ends and its upkeep and things like that. Like, man, that thing is a monster with redeploy. I've seen so many crazy things happen with it.
even
Yeah.
like most of the high level players still underestimate how good War Factory is at just winning the game in one turn. You go into replays, there's so many games you see it's like, oh, you would have won if you just built a War Factory.
Yep.
Like 2000 damage in one turn, GG.
I think in every patch we have played, the War Factory has been imbalanced in some way. Like some player or some player group will always find a way to abuse the unit, like a lot. Whether it's like a round 3 factory cheese from a while back or this armor finisher. It's always the same case. I think the unit needs a big rework.
Yeah, I think fundamentally the problem with War Factory is that it can't be balanced. I've talked about this before as well, but I think the problem is like the more expensive you make a unit, the more it has to do, because that's why it costs more. So like you want to invest more into it because it'll give more back to you. But for it to justify its cost, it kind of has to do a lot of stuff very well. And so either people play it because it's really good, which means that its counters are very difficult to get, so it's basically just too strong, or it's just too expensive and it doesn't do enough, and then nobody plays it. So I feel like this whole like balancing mechanic of when things get to a point where they're just so expensive to buy as a single unit, it becomes, I think, just like fundamentally really hard to balance it, because if something is only balanced around its cost, then that is a way easier mechanic for someone to use than, hey, you need like 3 different units to be able to counter this unit. Like you're balancing like a comp that needs multiple units against it's just expensive, so that's why it's good. Um, so yeah, I think it needs a rework probably in the long run.
Excellent thoughts all around. Thank you for sharing, fellas. Sounds like we have a big amount of agreement about how frustrating it feels to play against War Factory, how it interacts with the units in the game in terms of design and cost and upkeep and all these things, and sounds like we feel like there's a lot of problems with how War Factory interacts with the rest of the game. One interesting factoid I just want to throw out before we move on is that Bearlike, I believe, has mentioned on a stream at one point. I think this was when it's not Saratish. It was Conclusion was playing Prod War Factory. Someone asked him in chat, he was just like, what do you think about Prod War Factory right now, being played in like a tournament or something? And Bear like said something to the effect of like, if Prod War Factory is good, then we'll have to nerf it. So that statement always made me wonder, like, what do we think the like goal of War Factory is as a unit if like Prod War Factory isn't supposed to be a good strategy? He was specifically talking about like just Prod War Factories on the board, like just what happens if we build a bunch of them. But it really makes me wonder if like this Battle Factory strategy we use to like end the game in one turn is like the intended play of the units, or like if Prod Factory is the thing we're trying to balance it around, or what. But it's a very multifaceted unit, so I thought that was really interesting. But we do only have a few minutes left for the Balance Town Hall, so in the interest of getting to some chat questions, I did take a few earlier. So I'm curious if you fellas have any brief thoughts about these questions. Some are more meme than others. But earlier, Very asked, what do we think about if spells became single use? And the reason I picked this one is because I think it was Suri mentioned earlier, the recurrence of spells is a big issue he feels with how their power level is. I think Arbiter mentioned that as well. So as a thought experiment, what do you think about spells becoming single use? Anybody, not just Suri Arbiter. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. Maybe they could put the spells in two groups, like big spells and small spells, and the small spells could have a cooldown, and the big spells could have a single use, maybe something like that. That's a very good suggestion. I haven't
Yeah.
really understood why there is cooldown on spells. Like, it makes sense on something like maybe missile strike or some like pretty low impact spell that doesn't swing around completely in one guy's favor. But why is there a cooldown on a nuke, for example?
Yeah, a lot
I
of
think
spells
it's
feel like they're costed as if they would not come back, to be fair, right? Like Missile Strike is often a lot better than a Sentry Missile, but it comes back. Even like a one without coming back would still be able to kill a Wasp or a Mustang that's like protected. Uh, so yeah, that is like a very good point, and I agree. I think not you wouldn't do it to all spells, but it could be a way to nerf like Ion Beam, for example.
I mostly agree. I think if I'm just like as an idea of a potential reason, I think it might be one of the mechanics to try and shorten game length. Like the idea being the longer the game goes, the more hectic it gets. The more you've got, spells and cards like kind of stacking on top of each other. And then at some point, the game will just end because of it. But of course, like there's plenty of other mechanics like that. But I'm guessing that might be one of the reasons why.
Excellent responses. Certainly an interesting thought experiment at the very least. Next question we have is, how do we feel about packs like Crawler Mustang or Marksman Mustang existing currently with Saber Arclight or Saber Crawler as an example? Obviously, that's an extreme example, but how do we feel about the fact that those two choices exist concurrently? Just general thoughts on that.
I think it's fine. I like variety of starting packs, and like Crawler Mustang hasn't been bad in every meta. Like different packs will be good or bad in different metas. Like Ball Fang was good in some metas. So yeah, I think more starting packs is good.
Fair take. Any other thoughts?
I have the opposite reaction to that. I think they should delete the bad starting packs to combat the variance of the game.
I think they
But
should
this,
turn Mustang Marksman into Mustang Arclight. Like, Mustang Marksman is such a stupid pack, and at least Mustang Arclight, like, makes more sense. At least to me.
That's a very interesting one.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Like
I would agree with
Mustang
that.
is kind of it makes sense that there's no Mustang Fang, right? They're kind of redundant, but Mustang Marksmen are also like kind of redundant. Right? They shoot all the same targets. They're both kind of like low damage single target.
Absolutely, very interesting. So it sounds like we have two very I guess, like opposite end schools of thought here. We one think perhaps very strong or very weak hack options may have like variance issues with the game, and we also feel like different options can shine at different times, right? So perhaps there is merit to having these things in the game, even if they're not great right now. Perhaps they'll be good later, because as we talked about, certainly Ballfang has been good at certain points. Maybe Crawler Mustang has been good at certain points. So maybe it is fine. I think it's an interesting experiment to think
Yeah,
about.
and Arc Sledge was bad a long time ago, right? It was
Yes,
like the
yes,
worst
for sure.
pack. And
Yeah.
like, but they do
Absolutely.
need to be vigilant about the healths of the packs. I think those should get rebalanced often, because as the meta shifts, a pack like Arc Sledge can become quite good, but it still gives you plus 500 health. And like if there comes a time where Marksman Mustang were to become good, you wouldn't want it to be giving plus 700 health. That's obviously a little harder to imagine, but it could happen. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely something that doesn't tend to happen a whole lot with the balance of the game, right? Is the starting pack HP being adjusted. So 100%. I think that's very fair feedback about that.
Yeah, I feel like that one, they could be somewhat formulaic just off of the data, just every 2 weeks, taking a census of the data and just adjusting the packs up and down, kind of according to essentially a spreadsheet, and just have a little bit of human oversight on it.
Like, basically nobody memorizes the starting health adjustments of all the like pack modifiers. They just look at the packs and they're like, oh, this has a lot of health, or this has like 3200 health. Ouch.
Yeah, I knew them a long time ago, but now there's more specialists, there's more combos. Some of the combos changed, some got their health changed. Like, I've given up, so I would like to see those balanced more often. And they have been balanced a little bit more often recently than before. I would just want to see it keep going that direction.
I will say, like, it can be a little difficult to do that sometimes, because right now, suppose sabers are just way too dominant, then it's hard to really evaluate how good the rest of them are, because at some point it just matters how good they are specifically against saber.
Very
Yeah,
good. Well, thank
that's
you
fair.
very much for your thoughts on these questions. And thank you very much, chat, as well, for fielding these questions to us. Appreciate it. And most of all, thank you, Apuchi, Arbiter, Rooster, Suri. Thank you for joining me. Obviously, for Rooster and Suri, this is a very not good time slot, so I appreciate you being here. Thank you for being a part of this. And I'm sure that everybody listening appreciates hearing your perspectives on these things as well. I believe we have approached the end of how much time we have for the day, so thank you all very much for being here. As a reminder for everybody listening, there will be a MAG1 Season 2 Group D this Sunday, 26th January at 2 UTC. Apuchi, B-Man, Arbiter, and Agri will be competing during that. Be
Is
hosted
it
by Rooster
Sunday or
Wonderboats.
Saturday?
It's Sunday, 2 UTC, which could be Saturday. I'm just reading off
It's
the forum.
Saturday for
Oh, right. Sorry.
All good. All good.
Yes. This means I've one more day to learn how to play the game on this patch.
Very good. Well, thank you once again, fellas, for joining me. I'm your host, Time for Miracle. Thank you very much, everybody in chat, for joining the Townhall as well. We will be hosting this again in the future. Date to be announced at a later date. And that will be all for this broadcast. Have a good evening.
Take care, everyone.
Bye bye.
Good night.